Keir Starmer is doing here what he fundamentally believes in. In this case, releasing criminals early, while pretending that he is forced to do so because that is the inheritance from the Tories. Now, we know it's nonsense.
Seriously? Let's just sit on a shelf for a moment that early release was Tory policy too. In fact, the Conservatives released 10,000 prisoners early to ease the jail capacity crisis. This is only necessary because our prisons actually are full, and that every prisoner is released on licence under the supervision of the probation service and subject to recall if suspected of further offending. Imagine the shock for Tory leadership hopeful Tom Tugendhat when he finds out all of this is the fault of the government he was a part of, which along with other successive Conservative governments left our prisons in a state of crisis and at the point of collapse after a decade of underfunding and neglect. And that was despite years of warnings from those working within the criminal justice system.
Since '93, the prison population in England and Wales has more than doubled, from around 43,000 to 88,000. Pressure eased temporarily in 2021 during the pandemic, and the number of prisoners fell to just under 78,000. But numbers grew once again after the courts caught up with their backlogs. In October 2023, over 88,000 people were imprisoned, in a system with a maximum capacity of 88,890. This was the highest number recorded.
Listen to Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood explain why these emergency measures are needed.
We could see looters running amok, smashing in windows, robbing shops and setting neighbourhoods alight. In short, if we fail to act now, we face the collapse of the criminal justice system and a total breakdown of law and order. This is not the plot of some dystopian film. This is the legacy of the last Conservative government. This is the legacy of the guilty men. This crisis is now very close indeed.
As the Justice Secretary correctly points out, those guilty in the last government left our prisons on the brink of collapse. They put their own political interests before the country and left us facing a total breakdown of law and order. And now they have the audacity to criticise the new Labour government for taking the emergency measures needed to grip the very prisons crisis they created. The simple fact is successive Conservative governments brought the entire justice system, our primary mechanism for dealing with crime, to its knees, leaving the new government no option but to take emergency action to prevent the prison system collapsing entirely.
Another reason prisons are so overcrowded is because of the number of people awaiting trial or sentencing. The Ministry of Justice blamed the pandemic effect, but some say historical underfunding and a shortage of judges may also have contributed. What about building more prisons? In 2021, the government undertook a prison building programme and committed to creating 20,000 additional prison places by the mid-2020s. But by July last year, due to planning delays, only 5,400 have been delivered.
Thanks to more than a decade of underfunding and neglect by successive Conservative governments, on average it now takes nearly 2 years for a criminal case heard in the Crown Court to go from offence to verdict, creating a fundamental problem with access to justice, as criminal cases are more likely to collapse as victims of crime, desperate to move on with their lives, withdraw from legal proceedings. Delays in the court system mean there's now the highest number of prisoners on remand for 50 years in England and Wales, whilst overcrowded prisons, caused in part by people spending months on remand, further delay the courts. And this next bit won't come as a surprise to anyone. The long-term trend of Conservative governments was to champion longer sentences in an attempt to appear tough on crime, whilst slashing budgets for prisons, legal aid and courts. Since 2008, the number of adults sentenced to more than 10 years in prison has trebled, whilst the Ministry of Justice, responsible for prisons and courts, oversaw unprecedented cuts. 43% of all courts in England and Wales have closed. Just think about that. What the new government is doing is taking emergency measures to prevent the prison system collapsing entirely, a problem which was created by 14 years of neglect, inaction and underfunding by successive Conservative governments.